I recognize that all detectives can give themselves funnel, and if they're in time, or any constant, they're going to take away. For decades, rumors of affairs, concealed pregnancies, secret transactions, and vanished names have circulated through the royal halls of Buckingham Palace. Most were disregarded as tabloid fabrication. The type of spectacular rumor that makes headlines but fades in the hard light of reality. But now, one woman has stepped forward, and she wasn't your typical palace outsider. She was inside, watching, listening. I am holding the baby. To ensure her safety, her name has been protected. But for the first time in almost 40 years, a former royal nurse has broken her silence with a story so shocking, so unbelievable, that it undermines the delicate legitimacy of King Charles's reign. This nurse, whose career included high-security medical posts on royal estates, claimed to have witnessed the secret birth of King Charles's love child. A child was born in the shadows, concealed behind locked doors and forged hospital documents. The palace has denied the child's existence for decades. I kept the secret because I needed to. But now I'm older. I've got nothing to lose. People deserve the truth. The palace lied. These are the statements that now reverberate through royal circles in fear. Because, unlike unsubstantiated hypotheses or anonymous accusations, this account includes names, locations, dates, and facts that only those inside the inner sanctum could know. According to the nurse, the child was born in the early 1980s as a result of King Charles's affair, which occurred before or maybe during his marriage to Princess Diana. Camilla was not the mother's name. Camilla allegedly played a key part in the child's removal from royal records. She claims the child was a boy who was born healthy and resembled Charles almost immediately before being whisked away to a secluded estate within 48 hours. Then nothing happened. There is no birth certificate in the royal archive. There is no press statement. There is no acknowledgement. The palace, according to the nurse, washed everything. However, this is not merely a narrative about forbidden love or a child in exile. The most horrifying moment occurs years later, when the nurse assumes Princess Diana has uncovered the truth. Diana purportedly mentioned a boy who should have been part of this family in a diary post that is now gone from public records. This diary page, along with numerous others, vanished shortly after her death, raising suspicions of royal meddling. Now that the nurse's testimony has been made public, royal aides are reportedly panicking. Legal teams are scurrying. Requests for comment were ignored. Inside the palace, trust is quickly crumbling, because if what this nurse says is accurate, Charles's history is not only scandalous, but also dynastically hazardous. What happens if evidence of this child emerges? What happens if DNA tests show royal blood? What if the world finds that the king's firstborn son was removed from history? The monarchy has weathered numerous storms, but this could be the secret that pulls the entire house down, long before the fairy tale wedding to Princess Diana, when the world watched in awe as Charles went down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral with the shy 20-year-old kindergarten teacher from London. There was another woman, and according to many insiders, a different narrative. One thing the palace never wanted the world to know. In the late 1970s, Prince Charles faced enormous strain. At 30, he was the world's most eligible bachelor, but there was a looming deadline beneath the gloss of royal tours and charity appearances. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip had made it obvious that it was time to marry. But as history has revealed, Charles had other entanglements, most notably with Camilla Parker Bowles, the married lady whose hold on his heart had never wavered, despite family opposition. Despite that complicated relationship, there were others. One in particular has remained out of the historical spotlight until now. According to a retired royal nurse who is now coming out, Prince Charles had a brief but intense affair with a woman known only as S. She was young, educated, and descended from the aristocracy, but the palace did not consider her suitable for a future king. More damningly, she was not born in Britain, making her entirely unacceptable to the older royals of the day who valued tradition and optics over fondness. Their meetings were held in secret, usually under the guise of charity cooperation or countryside festivities, but it did not remain innocent for long. According to the nurse, S. became pregnant, which triggered an instant crisis at the palace. There was no conversation about marriage. There was no plan for a public acknowledgement, the nurse claims. The entire attention shifted to how we might resolve this without becoming a controversy. Charles, divided between his rising public responsibilities and private emotions, was said to be saddened, but under pressure from senior advisers and his father, Prince Philip, he agreed to the palace's demand. Silence. The nurse, who was a freshly appointed staff member at a private medical residence, famed for its royal discretion, claims she was allocated to a patient with a bogus name who arrived in the middle of the night under strong security. The woman was in labor, accompanied by 2 top aides and a private physician. There were no photographs, there are no formal records, except for a few hospital employees. No one else was permitted. The mother was scared, the nurse remembers. She inquired about the future. She inquired whether the infant would be taken, and no one gave her a straightforward response. When the child, a boy, was born, the nurse was among the first to see him. The resemblance was undeniable. Ears, nose, and eyes. He looked exactly like Charles as a newborn. We all saw it. What followed was a succession of quick, tightly regulated acts. The child was not listed in any official royal archives. A forged birth certificate was manufactured, with fictitious parents and an irrelevant address. Within 48 hours, the baby was taken to a secret estate in the countryside, allegedly owned by a royal ally. The letter S was also silently shifted. By the end of the week, both mother and kid had disappeared from royal spaces. In the years since, there has been no public mention of the affair. There were rumors in aristocratic circles, and curious reporters who got a bit too near to the truth, but the story was always buried. Several tabloid editors later admitted they had received legal threats and subtle warnings from palace lawyers about defamatory content regarding the Prince of Wales. One former reporter claimed he was handed a full dossier of royal family off-limits topics, and at the top of the list was anything involving an unconfirmed child born outside of wedlock to a foreign national between 1978 and 1982. But the nurse never forgets the child's face. The mother was in tears. The silent orders were whispered throughout the halls. It was one of the biggest lies I've ever witnessed, and I remained mute because I was scared of what they would do to me, what they would take away. But the truth does not go away. It waits. The affair may have been brief. The child may have been hidden. However, the cover-up was extensive, and it arrived with a clear message. There would be no scandals. There would be no heirs. There would be no traces. But as history has shown us time and again, the past has a way of reappearing, no matter how deeply buried. On the day the child was born, the sky over London was gloomy and indifferent. There was no royal announcement, no reporters stationed outside a hospital gate, and no flower bouquets thrown over the gates by excited people. Because this birth was not supposed to be celebrated, it was intended to be erased. The nurse, whose evidence has suddenly overturned the palace's long-standing denial, recalls the incident with excruciating clarity. The place was not a public hospital or a private wing of a well-known royal medical facility. It was a secret high-security medical estate in the countryside, reserved for sensitive operations, the type of location that did not appear on maps, and whose employees signed lifelong confidentiality contracts before entering. According to her version, the mother, known only as S, arrived late at night in the rear of a black vehicle with hidden plates. She was noticeably nervous, 6 or 7 months pregnant, and accompanied by two unknown guys in tailored suits who never offered their names and just chatted with the attending physician. They handed over a sealed folder stating, "This is the mother's identity. Do not say it loudly. Do not write it anywhere outside of these pages." I opened it once. The name inside matched one I'd heard whispered in courtrooms and kitchens for several months. That's when I realized it was real. The name of the father, Prince Charles, was never clearly stated. However, the entire staff was aware. The large number of armed guards, the orders for complete stillness, and the palace-employed doctor who personally witnessed the delivery made it impossible to overlook. The birth itself was simple. The nurse described it as peaceful, almost eerily quiet. There are no cries or pandemonium, only a quiet desperation. S was strong, silent, and just asked one question when the infant was placed in her arms. Will he ever understand who he is? The boy, robust and full of life, had distinctive features. The nurse and another midwife exchanged glances. They both spotted it right away. The ears, the eyeballs, the form of his nose. It was all Charles. No one had any doubts. However, there were no photographs. No footprints were inked on birth certificates. The child's first moments in the world were recorded only in the recollections of a few adults who were paid or warned to be silent. The following 48 hours were a haze. The baby was not admitted to a neonatal facility or held for postnatal surveillance. Instead, he was led to a separate room where he was kept under constant surveillance by two rotating guards and a governess flown in from outside the nation. On the second morning, the child was completely taken from the estate. They said he was being transferred for adoption, the nurse recalls. But something didn't sit well. No adoption agency I'd ever heard of used unmarked vehicles, silent escorts, or non-disclosure agreements. According to her, the baby was not placed with a new family. He was transferred to a private estate believed to be owned by a royal associate, where only a few people knew his true identity. From then, his trail became cold. However, the nurse believes this was planned. It wasn't simply a matter of hiding a child. It was about maintaining an illusion that the royal bloodline was pure, clean, and traceable. This child was a mistake that they could not accept into the lineage. Meanwhile, S was quietly escorted from the institution a week later. Staff murmurs suggest that she was given a new identity and relocated abroad. A few months later, she had vanished from all social media accounts. Some say she relocated to Canada. Others claim Australia. Nobody knows for sure. The palace has refused to comment, as it often does. Over the years, the nurse claims she has received anonymous calls inquiring about her well-being, delicate inquiries that fall just shy of threats. It was always someone I couldn't recognize. They'd say, "Just making sure you're okay. Do you recall how important secrecy is?" And then they would hang up. But she clutched on to one thing, the vision of the infant. She held the small newborn for less than 5 minutes before he was taken away. The youngster, who may now be a guy in his 40s, wandering about the world without understanding who he truly is. He was born a prince, but he was raised silently. The royal family has long relied on pomp, precision, and secrecy. But some secrets are too big to keep hidden forever, especially when they cry for the first time before the eyes of those paid to forget. Only now has one of them decided to recall. Princess Diana knew more than she let on. Some within the royal institution portray Diana as sentimental or naive. But those closest to her have long argued the opposite. Diana was perceptive, intuitive, and frighteningly brilliant at connecting dots that the palace desired she wouldn't. By the mid-90s, she had begun to connect the dots, uncovering one of the most explosive mysteries in royal history. The former royal nurse, who had been silent for nearly 4 decades, remembers the first time she felt Diana knew about the love child. This was around 1995. I was completing a brief rotation at a private facility near Kensington Palace. I was brought in to help with a charity event and was instructed to give documents to her employees. She wasn't meant to be there, but when I turned the corner, there she was, and she gazed right at me. The nurse didn't expect anything else, but Diana reportedly retained her eyes and whispered, "I remember your face." I froze. She did not smile. She did not accuse. She just looked sad, as if she knew I'd been carrying something dreadful for a long time. According to later stories from her butler, Paul Burrell, Diana became increasingly skeptical of the royal family during her final years. She was frequently described as feeling watched, misled, and manipulated. However, few were aware that she had began writing her suspicions in a set of private handwritten journals. Not the ones ultimately leaked to tabloids, but a second set known only to her most trusted advisors. The former nurse alleges Diana wrote directly about the youngster in one of those entries. She'd heard rumors. Camilla and a royal assistant had a talk, which one of her workers overheard. The word boy popped up. Then Charles in Canada. Diana no longer believed in coincidences. The nurse goes on to state that she learned from a third-party staffer that Diana had disclosed her suspicions to her therapist, who then recorded them in her notebook. One section, memorized by heart, purportedly reads, "There is a child. I'm certain of it. Not ours. Not Camilla's. Charles is concealing something. Somebody. I'm not sure where he is, but I can feel it in my bones. He was stolen from the public. From me. From history. What is the most chilling part? That diary is no longer available. At least not publicly." Following Diana's sad death in Paris in 1997, the world mourned. Something else was going on behind the palace walls, though. According to the nurse and confirming reports from former royal personnel, her Kensington residence was inspected quickly and silently. While William and Harry received much of her property, certain personal things, including her private writings, were intercepted. Paul Burrell has mentioned in interviews about documents and personal letters that were mysteriously missing. At the time, few questioned this. The chaos and grief surrounding her death overwhelmed administrative details. However, in light of the nurse's assertions, the missing diary pages take on a deadly new importance. Diana had begun uncovering the truth, the nurse says. She wasn't just assembling bits and pieces, she was chronicling them. Someone did not want that documentation to persist. There are also rumors that she intended to go public, not about the child specifically, but about the rot at the center of the crown. As she purportedly termed it, a 1997 interview request with a big American network was rumored to cover topics no British journalist would touch. Of course, that interview never took place. After her death, the child's trail apparently became even colder. If Diana had been investigating, whomever was protecting the secret would have undoubtedly doubled down. They were terrified of her, the nurse explains, because she is loved, because she had nothing more to lose. To this day, neither King Charles nor the palace have responded to the allegation that Diana knew about a hidden love child. No mention is made in official biographies. The establishment remained silent, but the public has begun to wonder, what did Diana learn in her final years? Why did the palace go to such great efforts to remove the evidence? If the nurse's remembrance of that diary note is correct, Princess Diana may have been the first royal to discover the truth and the final person to come close to revealing it. That missing page may still be waiting someplace in a hidden vault or an unmarked folder deep within the royal archives. A few lines of pen could finally confirm what the palace has been denying for generations, that King Charles might have had another son. Diana knew it. Camilla, according to palace insiders and the royal nurse, worked quickly and ruthlessly to guarantee that King Charles's rumored love child would never be remembered by the public. Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, has spent decades working to alter her image. From the woman who ruined the fairy tale to a steadying royal force, Her public shift has been nothing short of deliberate. Behind the scenes, however, insiders claim her primary concern was always control rather than image. Control over Charles. Control of the narrative. Control over the crown's future. Nothing challenged that control more than the birth of another kid, particularly one the result of Charles's liaison with a woman who was not her. The retired royal nurse who was present at the birth of the youngster, now thought to be Charles's love child, makes it clear Camilla knew, and she wasn't pleased. There was talk even back then, the nurse remembers. Camilla found out practically quickly after her child was born, not through the press, but through her own network of dedicated aides, and she made it her job to ensure that child was erased from royal records. The nurse claims she was later contacted by a woman she recognized as Camilla's longtime confidant. She didn't make a direct threat, but she was obvious about her intentions. You were part of something fragile. That is all it ever was. There is no point in revisiting what has already been addressed. Camilla's influence did not end with quiet intimidation. According to numerous allegations gathered over the years from former staffers, she played a hands-on role in assuring the boy could never hold a position inside the royal hierarchy. That meant more than just elimination from the family tree. It meant the legal termination of any road to inheritance, status, or even acknowledgement. Camilla is thought to have arranged a covert legal maneuver using her influence over Charles's private secretary at the time, ensuring that any illegitimate offspring born during that decade would have no claim to titles, estates, or lineage unless expressly recognized by the royal. It was a clause contained in a private royal family trust deed, which was purportedly signed mere months after the child was born. She wasn't satisfied with the child disappearing, the nurse explains. She wanted to make sure the story would not be resurrected. No legal standing, nothing. Many believe her goals stemmed from jealousy rather than controversy management. Camilla had fought for Charles' attention for decades, constantly coming second to Diana in the public spotlight, and supposedly second to other brief, passionate encounters. But this affair resulted in anything tangible. A child, a prospective son. According to one former staffer who worked at Highgrove in the 1990s, Camilla once made a shocking remark in passing. There are two heirs in this family. Nobody else matters. Nobody else ever will. It was interpreted as a reference to William and Harry, but some today feel it was also an intentional dismissal of the son Charles's fathered, but never publicly acknowledged. As Charles rose to the throne and Camilla assumed her contentious role as queen consort, all official documents and archive mentions of the event faded away. Any press that hinted at an unspoken scandal from Charles' youth was promptly suppressed with legal threats. Old tabloid clippings vanished from libraries. Editors were paid or coerced to remove stories. One investigative journalist, who attempted to follow the trail in 2009, had her money inexplicably withdrawn. Camilla seems to have succeeded. The youngster was forgotten. But secrets carry weight. They don't disappear. Instead, they fade into the shadows, waiting for a break in the hush. Camilla's role in the cover-up has been brought back into focus now that the nurse has come out, and the world is asking questions again. And for a lady who spent decades forcing the world to forget, the one thing she dreads most may now be happening. They're beginning to recall. For decades, the mystery of King Charles's rumored secret son was just that, a story. A whisper in the tabloid margins. A half-remembered rumor that never seemed to spread. However, as the retired royal nurse's claims continued to reverberate throughout the palace, one question becomes louder and more pressing with each passing day. If the child exists, where are they now? That question has sparked a flurry of new study. Journalists, independent researchers, and even amateur sleuths have begun to connect the dots across continents, using bits of information, leaked images, and financial anomalies linked to royal friends. And the track, which was once icy cold, has begun to warm. The nurse's vivid remembrance of the child's birth has revived public attention and supplied vital clues. The child was born between 1979 and 1981. He was brought to a private estate held by a recognized royal ally, which is thought to be in the English countryside or possibly Scotland. By the time he was a toddler, he had left the United Kingdom. I learnt later, she recalls, that he was transferred overseas. They didn't want him to grow up within reach of the throne. It was too hazardous, too tempting. Initial reports from the early 2000s, long buried in obscure newspapers, stated that a young child fitting the description had been enrolled at a private boarding school in Canada under the backing of a British trust. When the trust was later probed, it was discovered that it was tied to a former royal legal advisor who worked for Charles in the late 1980s via shell businesses. That student, whose name we'll call Daniel for privacy reasons, disappeared from the school's records just before turning 16. Some believe he was then transported to New Zealand, where a tiny but persistent group of researchers claim he was reared under a new surname, but received irregular, inexplicable payments from overseas accounts linked to London. The most solid proof was revealed in 2012, when a former royal estate groundskeeper anonymously sent a photo to an independent journalist. The image, grainy but clear enough to analyze, depicted a man in his early 30s at a charity event in Australia. He had a strong similarity to a young Charles: deep-set eyes, angular jawline, and big ears. Standing beside him was a woman identified as his adopted mother, who, according to public records, worked for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the 1980s. The journalist who followed the tip traced the man to a humble residence in Wellington, New Zealand. She sent a note asking an interview. Days later, the house was vacated. No forwarding address. There is no digital trace. He'd vanished again. It was like he knew we were coming, she later explained, and he wanted nothing to do with it. One explanation holds that the man, now in his 40s, is completely aware of his origins. Another theory holds that he only recently realized his true identity and his living in self-imposed exile to protect himself and others around him. In any case, he has never stepped out publicly, and no definitive DNA test has been found to validate or refute the allegations. Despite his lack of public appearances, his legacy lingers. One woman, a former palace employee who retired in 2006, describes an extraordinary experience at a royal charity event in Canada in the early 2000s. There was a young man, quiet, well-dressed, with an unusual atmosphere. He did not say anything, but he was accompanied by a handler. I was told he was a special guest of a Commonwealth foundation, but no one could tell me which foundation. When I looked at him, it was like seeing Charles 30 years younger. Geneticists have also weighed in. Certain facial characteristics, including as the curvature of the ears and the form of the nose, are very impossible to recreate without a clear biological link, according to certain family heritage experts. If this man isn't related to Charles, a researcher told me, then he's the most statistically improbable doppelganger we've ever documented. Nonetheless, without certified DNA, the palace remains silent. Official pronouncements continue to deny any suggestion of an unacknowledged child. However, the Internet tells a different story. Forums full with side-by-side image comparisons, speculation, and digital reconstructions of what Charles's son could look like. And at the heart of it all is one question: where is he now? Some feel he will never come forward, that the years of secrecy, displacement, and personal upheaval have created a barrier too strong to overcome. Others believe he is observing, waiting for the moment when the palace is unable to stop him. But one thing is certain: the world is searching for him. And if even a small part of the nurse's narrative is accurate, he could be out there, living a life he never asked for, with a name he never knew, and a birthright he was never allowed to claim. In the hush of royal rooms, where pictures from centuries ago stare down, it's easy to forget that beneath the etiquette and grandeur are actual beings, sons, husbands, and dads. And when Prince William supposedly discovered the truth about his father's putative secret kid, his reaction was not one of fury. It was something quieter, deeper, and much more disturbing: grief. According to experts who have worked closely with the Prince of Wales, William first learned of the supposed love child through a confidential letter left behind by his mother, Princess Diana. One assistant, commenting on the condition of anonymity, claimed that after Diana's death, William was finally granted access to a cache of her private writings, notes, observations, and diary passages meticulously kept by a trusted staff member. Among them was a section marked solely with the letters SC, and a line reading, "If the truth is ever told, he will not be the only son." At the time, William was still a teen. According to sources, the note was not immediately understandable. But as he got older, particularly after his father's ascent to the throne, the gravity of those remarks began to sink in. Years later, William reportedly started asking inconspicuous questions, not publicly, not through confrontation, but through discreet talks with two retired staffers who had previously worked for Charles in the 1980s. A former palace employee said he was shaken by what he heard. He did not explode, he did not accuse, but he changed, the insider said. It was like a door closing. Whatever warmth existed between William and Charles, whatever efforts Charles took to repair their strained relationship, froze at that moment. William apparently challenged his father personally during a meeting at Highgrove. What happened behind the locked door is only known to a few, but one detail has since emerged. "That part of my life is over," Charles reportedly stated. "That was a mistake, one that had to remain buried." How did William respond? Silence. According to the same insider, "If he is my blood, I have the right to know, but I will not let this hurt my family." Kate Middleton, the current Princess of Wales, is reported to have learned of the putative child around the same time, while she has never talked publicly about the situation and is unlikely to do so. Insiders say she was grieved, not by the child's existence, but by what it represented, another burden inherited by her children. It wasn't anger that consumed them. It was sadness, a family confidant said. It's unfortunate that their legacy might be built on lies. Sadness that Diana may have died knowing this information, but unable to reveal it. Sad that the palace they now serve is still concealing something so big. William made a decision, not to pursue further, not to go public, but we need to draw a line. He reportedly informed his private secretary, "This does not reach George, not now, perhaps not ever, because William's priority has always been protection, not revenge, protection for the crown, his wife, his children, and the interpretation of history that allows them to progress." But he realizes the truth is out there, and as the public's curiosity develops and the palace becomes increasingly hushed, he realizes that silence may no longer be an option. Because if there is a man out there, his blood brother, born in exile, the heir may one day be forced to confront him. And when that day arrives, no title, crown, or cover-up will safeguard what was previously hidden. When the walls of royal secrecy start to break, they don't fall down at once. They bend under pressure, creak under scrutiny, and finally, something gives. Following the nurse's stunning statement and the mounting public demand for answers, the palace found itself at a crossroads. For decades, all it needed to conceal scandal was quiet. But this was different. The allegation was not unclear. It had a date, a location, a witness, and, if the nurse was to be believed, a child whose bloodline had the potential to shake the monarchy to its roots, and thus, within the palace walls, a decision was reached. Quiet, unofficial, and extremely sensitive, but no less important. Verify without validating. Senior aides apparently whispered this command. The idea was not to confirm the story publicly, but rather to be ahead of it privately, in case the alleged son came forward with proof of his identity. According to two Clarence House insiders, a covert effort began in late 2023, shortly after reports of the nurse's involvement reached the media. A medical consulting firm headquartered outside the UK was hired under the pretense of heritage bloodline analysis. The aim was to uncover potential threats to the royal succession, using historical and contemporary DNA information. But there was a catch. Royal DNA is not freely accessible. Even within the institution, there are layers of procedure and legal obstacles. Unlike most families, the Windsors do not offer samples for public ancestry databases or consent to DNA testing without stringent legal counsel. Fortunately, there are workarounds. Over the years, random objects belonging to senior royals, from ancient hairbrushes to garments stored in archives, had been secretly gathered. Most had been kept for historical reasons. They now had a new purpose: genetic comparison. They were looking for a match, the insider said, not to confirm a son, but to be prepared in case someone does. They wanted to know what they were up against. According to sources, 2 samples were tested, one from the nurse's description of the child's likely identity, and one from an anonymous donor identified as a person of interest based on the chronology and facial traits. What are the results? Inconclusive, but not dismissible. The word "not dismissible" has apparently tormented palace employees ever since, while the DNA was not a perfect match. Because to degradation of old samples and the lack of a certified test from the purported son, it was close enough to cause internal concern. Certain Y chromosome markers corresponded to Charles's heritage, enough to make denial appear dishonest, but not enough to warrant a formal acknowledgement. Insiders say this is when the strategy moved from containment to prevention. They started watching, the insider adds, not in a hostile manner, but very near. Financial records, travel documentation, even call logs. They wanted to know if the man, if he existed, was about to become public. At the same time, palace legal teams reportedly convened with crisis communication professionals to review previous contingency plans created during Diana's reign. Plans include paternity rumors, extramarital offspring, and, astonishingly, a potential DNA challenge to the line of succession. None of this made news. None of it leaked, but something else happened. There was a dramatic tightening of access to royal medical records, as well as new limits on the publication of 1980s historical information. Why now? The public didn't inquire, but those observing intently understood. The palace circled its wagons. In the months that followed, Charles was noticeably absent from some family gatherings. William, while present, appeared tense and distant. Camilla, according to royal observers, became even more reserved, rarely speaking off-script and clearly uneasy at gatherings when public mingling was anticipated. Behind the scenes, the royal machine was surviving, as it usually does in times of crisis. But for how long? The nurse's story remains undisputed. The murmurs continue to spread, and the one thing that could silence them, a certified DNA test, is purposefully kept out of reach. Because if that test were ever to be revealed, undeniable, unfiltered, and conclusive, no amount of tradition, protocol, or crown polishing could prevent what happened next. The rewrite of royal history and the public unveiling of a man long hidden by blood, terror, and design. For years, the British people had accepted the palace's unwritten rule that certain topics were simply not for discussion: royal affairs, hidden feuds, Diana's unresolved questions. All were tucked neatly behind ceremonial smiles and carefully phrased remarks. But this time, things were different. The discovery of King Charles's putative secret son, revealed in horrifying detail by a former royal nurse, did more than raise eyebrows. It set the nation on fire. What started as a fringe issue on royal gossip sites swiftly grew into popular discourse. It began with a trending hashtag, #CharlesSecretSon, which had over 2 million mentions within the first 72 hours following the nurse's broadcast appearance. From Twitter to TikTok, Instagram Reels to YouTube exposes, the internet is awash with speculations, face comparisons, old newspaper articles, and, most dangerously for the monarchy, outraged inquiries. Why isn't anyone in the palace addressing this? If it is false, why not say so? And if it's true, how did they conceal it for 40 years? This is more than simply gossip. This is a succession. This is history. This is our royal family. The topic immediately moved from social media to primetime television. On afternoon panels, political experts and historians discussed the ramifications. Was there a constitutional crisis? Could Parliament compel the palace to admit a DNA challenge? Should the monarchy, as a taxpayer-funded institution, be permitted to hide genetic information that may alter the royal lineage? The public's tone evolved quickly. What began as curiosity quickly turned into fury, particularly among younger generations and those who remain emotionally loyal to Princess Diana's memory. This isn't just about Charles, one caller remarked during a heated BBC Radio 5 live discussion. It is about how Diana was silenced if she knew and tried to reveal it, but it was covered up. Everything we've heard about her death, pain, and divorce is tainted. Within days, Change.org petitions began to spread, seeking an official investigation into the legitimacy of the supposed kid, and requesting that King Charles give a DNA sample or publicly reject the accusation. One petition received over 500,000 signatures in a single week, with hundreds commenting, "We do not want fairy stories. We want the truth. Don't hide behind crowns. You work for us. Justice for Diana. Justice for the forgotten child." In the United States, where Diana is still seen as a revered figure, major sites such as CNN, The View, and even Oprah's staff began to cover the subject. A royal insider proposed that Netflix consider funding a docu-series about the time frame, including with reenactments of the nurse's claims and testimony from former royal staff members. Meanwhile, the palace remained silent. That quiet, once a barrier, was now interpreted as complicity. Prominent journalists who had hitherto been loyal to the royal establishment began to express doubt. One prominent royal correspondent, who had covered Queen Elizabeth II's reign for 3 decades, published a bold op-ed. If even half of what this nurse says is correct, history has been changed. A human life born to the monarch was annihilated. And if the monarchy is to survive, it must confront the truth rather than conceal it beneath layers of gilded tradition. Camilla, who was already unpopular with a big portion of the population, was once again targeted. Snot. My queen reappeared as old clips of her giggling during tough moments, skirting Diana-related inquiries, and appearing noticeably uncomfortable when children were addressed in interviews. Some protesters took to the gates of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House with placards that read, "Where is he? Charles, be a father, not a coward. Did Diana die with knowledge?" Even more devastating were the comments within the Commonwealth. In Canada and Australia, where Republican sentiment has been gradually rising, this controversy fueled the flames. "Why should we stay loyal to a monarchy that lies to its subjects?" questioned an Australian senator at a parliamentary session. "If they are hiding a son, what else are they concealing?" Polls started to fluctuate. A YouGov study, taken a week after the controversy surfaced, revealed a 14-point loss in popular trust for King Charles, the biggest drop since his reign began. Even support for the monarchy as an institution has decreased substantially, particularly among people aged 18 to 35. But what is the most damning component of the backlash? It was not the protests, editorials, or petitions. It was an emotional betrayal experienced by the British people. For decades, they have supported the royals. During divorces, tragedies, and transformations, they had mourned with them, cheered with them, and taught their children that the crown meant dignity and stability. Now they asked, have we been duped? Was the story of fabrication all along? And hanging in the air heavier than ever was the final, irresistible demand. We deserve the truth. Whether the palace will ever reveal the truth remained unknown. But one thing was clear. Individuals were no longer satisfied to keep secrets behind closed doors. They were prepared to shout. For centuries, the British monarchy has relied on its mystique, the ability to withstand wars, scandals, and cultural changes by refusing to flinch. Its strength has never been in what it communicates, but rather in what it withholds. Silence has always been their most effective weapon. But this time, silence could be its undoing. The story of King Charles's rumored secret son, previously disregarded as wild supposition, is no longer hidden in the shadows. It now makes headlines, dominates social feeds, and permeates debates in cafes, classrooms, and parliaments. The admission by a trusted royal nurse has set off a chain reaction that no crisis team, public relations effort, or stiff upper lip can stop. A youngster possibly of royal blood, hidden, erased. History has forgotten this until now. If accurate, this is more than simply a scandal. It is a betrayal of Diana, William, the public, and the hallowed story that the monarchy has built around itself for generations. A narrative of heritage, destiny, and unbroken bloodlines dating back to William the Conqueror. But now, as the specter of an unacknowledged heir emerges from the shadows, the crown is trapped by its own deception. Prince William, as stoic as ever, may attempt to safeguard the next generation. But even he can't deny the weight of a brother who may share his blood. Camilla, already under pressure from the public, is facing additional investigation for her apparent role in silencing the past. And King Charles, aging, besieged, and clinging to his legacy, must now decide whether to confront the truth or let history to condemn him posthumously. Because make no mistake, the question is no longer whether, but when. When will the man in question speak? When will a journalist get proof? When will a DNA test emerge, forcing the palace's hand? The monarchy is facing its greatest existential threat in contemporary history. And it's not coming from a foreign invader, a rebellious colony, or even a contentious divorce. It is emanating from within, from blood, from a secret wrapped in falsehoods, buried in quiet, and now clawing its way to the surface. And if this man, this claimed son of the king, can find his voice, the entire world will listen. Not for the sake of drama, but because we all know what it's like to be denied our truth. It's our place, our name. The British people have been patient, loyalty, respect for tradition. However, they are now wanting something much more powerful than pomp and spectacle. They want honesty. Crowns and titles can be inherited or awarded, but truth is earned. And no matter how long it is denied, the truth eventually emerges. It may take several weeks, or months, or years, but eventually the doors will open. The veils will lift, and the crown's deepest secret may no longer be concealed.